Hello, crypto world! Welcome to the Chart Historian. My name is Justin, and on this channel, I delve deep into crypto charts, exploring chart structures, fractals, and patterns. This is going to be a Casper video. In this video, I want to talk about the repetitive macro structure. It is my goal in this video to show you that what is taking place on the Casper chart is nothing alarming. In fact, this decline is nothing alarming. Now, for those of you who are familiar with my analysis, you understand that Casper has a repetitive macro structure. For those of you who are new, this repetitive macro structure is the centerpiece of my technical analysis. Through this macro structure, we can understand where we are and what we can expect to take place in the near future. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump back to the early days of the Casper chart. Okay, so this is the very beginning of the Casper chart. Now, I am no longer on TradingView. This is charts.cointrader.pro. It's a website. It's a free website that you can go back further in time on a small time frame than what TradingView typically allows you to do. So this chart, for those of you who are new, I'll quickly go through this macro structure. For those of you who are familiar with this, stick around, it's good review. So Casper starts with a move up. Now this move up is a bull run structure, believe it or not. It's repeated here, and then it's repeated on a very large scale here. You know, I deep dive into this structure on my Patreon page. I'll put a link to my Patreon page in the description of this video. It's a $5 a month subscription. So there is this bull run structure. Price retreats. It then does this structure here that consists of several waves. I call this a topping structure. Now, it doesn't always take place this high up. It takes place after price retreats. After this structure, price breaks to the downside and bottoms out. If we were to zoom in on this fractal right here, we would see that there's a small little bounce at the bottom of this. That is an indication of the bottom. After that, price moves up. Now it goes into a new kind of phase. This phase over here is the sideways range-bound phase that Casper goes through, and it does it every single time. So it moves up, pulls back, moves back up again, and kind of winds down to a point before moving into the next fractal. In the next fractal, price moves up again, it drops, goes flat or sideways, and then moves up again, and then winds its way to a point again. In this one, it drops. Sometimes, you'll see in the next one, it just winds its way down to a point. After this comes a bounce. Now, this bounce right here terminates this sideways range-bound time. Okay, so that is the essence of this repetitive macro structure. From here on out, it is all repeating what took place over here. Now, there's something important to understand about a fractal when it repeats. When a fractal repeats, the idea copies over, it repeats once again, but the timing, the height, and the depth, those will always be original to the new structure. So with the timing, height, and depth being original, it allows for fractals to repeat in a novel way, a way that just by looking at it, you may not realize that it has repeated, but once you dive in and examine the functions, you'll see that it is indeed a repeat of the previous structure. So here we go again with the bull run. It's a repeat. Here is that topping structure. So after the peak, it retreats and does those waves. It then breaks and goes to the downside. At the bottom, we have that bounce. Look how large this bounce was when compared to the first time it took place. So after this decline, price moves up, and I want you to examine the way it did it. This time, it was just a quick move up, one candle, it pulls back, and then it moves back up again, moves back down, and winds its way to a point before moving up again, in the same way that it did over here. So price moved up in the first one. This one was a move up that created a peak that took many candles to materialize. However, This time it was one candle, but the same function of it moving up and then retreating takes place. It moves up again in this one, just as this one did, and then it winds its way down to a point, kind of going flat, just like the original one did as well. So once again, price moves back up, drops, does this flat sideways thing, creating this bowl type structure, which we saw over here. And then it moves flat and down to a point. So this one moved flat and then dropped. This one, instead of moving flat and then dropping, it just kind of winds its way down to a point. After which we have the bounce, and that terminates this range-bound sideways time. Once this completes, it goes into the bull run structure. Now, this bull run structure was just absolutely massive. And here is an important concept to understand about Casper. Casper is a wild card. It will print structures that are tiny, and then it'll print them much larger, and then it will print small structures again maybe, but then it'll just like knock something out of the park with a massive structure like this. This phenomenon is continuing to play out. So after this decline, so just like in the bull run, it moves up, price retreats, and then goes into this wavy topping structure. Well, that takes place again, but this time it really declined. It crashed in that waving topping structure is all the way down here. So this was a massive fall. So after this, it goes into that decline and it ends with a bounce. Now, it starts to play out on a really large time frame over here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump over to TradingView so we can get a better picture of it, because it's a little easier to use TradingView than this chart sometimes. Okay, so here is that decline, and it ends with a small little bounce. That is this bounce right here after the end of the decline, or if you will, this bounce over here. After which, price moves up and enters into the range-bound time. So let's zoom in on this fractal. So price moves up and pulls back, and then moves up again, and then winds its way down. This is hearkening back to this structure right here, where it moved up in one candle and then pulled back. This is the second time it played out versus the first time, where that first move up took a long time to form that peak. So on today's chart, it repeated the idea of the second time this fractal played out. Let's zoom out a bit so we can see it a little better. So price moves up, moves back down again, moves back up, and then winds its way down to a point, just like it does here. Price moves up, moves down again, moves back up, and then winds its way to a point. This one went flat, whereas the first time it kind of winded its way down. So in this sense, it copied this one more so than this one, at least on this part right here, this part. So once it completes this structure, what does it do? It moves up again into the next fractal. So that next fractal, price moves up, drops, goes flat, moves up again, creates this bowl type structure, and then goes flat and drops. That's what it did the first time. Price moves up, it drops, goes flat, moves up again, creating this bowl structure, and then it winds its way down to a point. Just like here in the second time it did it, it winds its way down to a point. So what does it do? After that second range-bound fractal, it goes into the final range-bound fractal, which is the bounce. This bounce has taken much longer than I anticipated. You know, when this first started, it started with this, and I thought, you know what? This is it. This is the bounce. It's tiny compared to everything else. And then it goes into this, and this actually starts to play along with what a bull run structure begins like. But as it developed, it was clearly not a bull run structure, and it just kept dropping and dropping and dropping. Well, that is what the bounce can do. If we examine this bounce, which I believe it has followed the basic idea of this bounce the closest, you can see it really declines. It declines lower than the entire range-bound time. On this instance, it didn't, but this one, it does. And on today's chart, it does as well. It drops lower than all the previous range-bound time. So in essence, it's just doing what it should be doing. We have historical precedent of a severe drop in this fractal. That's exactly what it's doing. Okay, so now that we see that this structure has been playing out, it looks unique every single time it repeats, but the functions that we are looking for are there. So what happens next? Well, let's dive into this structure a little closer. What I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this fractal and paste it onto today's chart in charts.cointrader.pro versus TradingView because I have access to this fractal and I can copy and paste it, whereas on TradingView I don't. So this is that fractal, that bounce, copy and pasted. While we do have quite a bit of difference, there are a lot of similarities too. So we see it move up and does this first wave. This is the one that I thought was the end of the bounce because it was a bounce. It was a tiny bounce. But as it played out, it was evident with time that it was playing out on a much larger scale. So price moves up, it moves down. Both the fractal and the chart do this. It moves up to another peak. And this is where it really begins to deviate. On today's chart, it really declined. But there are still the basic kind of concepts. So, for instance, we have this little peak here. Well, this was much more exaggerated on today's chart. And then the decline was also much more exaggerated. It has this kind of flat area right here. And then it begins to decline. And today's decline has some similarities to this, but again, it's unique and it's original. So one other thing, it moves up to a peak right here, and then the drop begins. We see that same thing on today's chart. The drop begins. And then this ending part on the fractal was a small amount of time compared to what it's doing on today's chart. But as you can see, the basic idea is being echoed once again today. We have this move up and then this long drawn out decline. We see that basic idea here just on a much smaller time frame. So now that we can compare this bounce to today's chart, we see that we have likely completed or almost completed this bounce based off of this fractal. So if we are complete this bounce, what should we be looking for? Well, we want this low to hold. That is a really important point to understand. So let's zoom in here a bit closer. This is on TradingView. If this is indeed the bottom of the bounce, the end of the bounce, this should hold. Now, I don't know how long this will take to go flat. What we're basically doing, at least at this point, what I believe we're doing is a bottoming structure. So this bottom structure needs to hold if it is indeed a bottom structure. We don't want to see something like that. If we do, that means we continue this decline and this fractal, this bounce fractal, will continue to play out. The way it's looking, I think there's a good argument to say that this is likely a bottoming structure playing out. If it can hold this without dropping low, it's going to move up. Now, what will that move up look like? Well, once again, let's go back to the original structures. This green box is what we should be moving into. Now, it played out here on a very, very small time frame. In this structure, it basically does a very similar thing to this with one big exception. So the way I break this structure down is it has three waves. Wave 1 is the small wave, wave 2 is the larger wave, wave 3 brings it to a peak, it pulls back. The difference between this one and this one, you can go back to some of my other previous videos and see it. This one over here drops all the way back down into wave 1 zone. In fact, it's very similar to this first little tiny thing that I call wave 1, wave 2, wave 3. It drops down into wave 1 zone. That is what this one does. So you should be prepared for either one of those structures to potentially play out. And of course, it's not going to look identical to this. It's going to look original, just like every single time these structures play out, they look original. I'm hoping it does something like this where it doesn't drop down. So if we are doing this bottoming structure right now, eventually it's going to start moving up. Let's zoom into the structure. So here we are zoomed in closer. Now this is the first bull run structure. This is the kickoff of the bull run. So as you can see, there's the bottoming part right here, and then it begins to start moving up, and eventually it begins to pick up steam as it goes. But we need to start working on that first wave. That first wave is not going to look like a bull run at all. It's just going to start making higher highs like this. It will be a wave. It's going to pull back, and then it will start picking up steam as it moves along. So if we can hold our ground here, or that is to say here, we will start the bull run structure. So folks, this is why I believe there will be a bull run. So as of now, I'm looking for the slow kind of grind up to begin. It will start moving up, not impressively. So this could, in theory, be maybe part of the very early stages of that move up, or it could play out longer, and this just kind of bounces around if this is the bottoming structure. But eventually, it will start to move up, and eventually, it will pick up steam. I am looking for the first telltale signs of this. So that's what we need to look for, folks. A kind of not impressive but gradual move up. It's going to be a fight. There's a lot of pullbacks in this, so expect something like that. If we start seeing that, this is going to be good news because it will pick up steam. So folks, that's the way I see it. That is why I believe, despite all the negativity, despite the horrible performance of Casper, I believe there's a bull run nearby. I also believe that Casper is really a wild card. We can have structures that just are massive. Now, I'm not saying this bull run structure is going to be massive, but you can't rule stuff like that out. It also could be small. It's unpredictable, and that's what drew me to Casper, was this wild card side of it. Sure, you take your risks with a tiny little bull run, or it could just knock it out of the park as well. So anyways, I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, it'd be much appreciated if you hit that thumbs up button. This is not financial advice. I'm not a financial advisor. But if you did enjoy this video and you're not yet a subscriber, I recommend hitting that subscribe button. I'll continue to follow up on this chart as it continues to develop. It is my belief we have good days ahead. I'm so glad you caught this video. I hope you catch my next one. Have a great day, and bye for now.